All right, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Our folks, welcome back to the podcast. I am thrilled to have as my guest today, Hadley Vlahos. Hadley, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So Hadley is a registered nurse. She's a hospice registered nurse, rather, mother and wife. She started her career as a registered nurse at 22. As a hospice nurse, she now visits people at their home while also educating and sharing stories about hospice care on social media, where she has more than 1 million followers. Oh my God. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
So before we go in here, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
So originally I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, grew up really in the Destin, Florida area, and now we're back near Louisiana, near New Orleans.
Okay, awesome. So look, I started reading this book and, I want to get it here. What's the best way to do this? Hold on. I want to do this. If I can't do it, because that's not working too well. There we go.
Yeah.
And well, first of all, hospice in and of itself is such an intense topic. And I thought, okay, I'm going to read this. You have the topic brings with it a certain weight and intensity, but first of all, your writing is so freaking good. The stories you share are just amazing and heartwarming and touching and life affirming, which is kind of surprising. Anyway, I just want to congratulate you on the book and your writing of the book. But I'm really curious. We're going to talk more about the book. How did you get into this nursing and then hospice nursing? How did that start for you?
Yeah, so I had always wanted to be a writer. That's originally what I went to college for at Florida State University. And then when I got pregnant with my son, right after my freshman year, I said, you know what, that's not going to cut it for providing. So I started to look into options that would provide a stable income, and nursing seemed like a good option. With just 2 years would make me a registered nurse and provide very stable income. So I went into it. I did the nursing program as a single mom and graduated on time. And then from there, I went into the hospital like most new nurses do. And I was just very burnt out 1 year in. It's extremely hard to juggle multiple patients at one time. And I saw hospice nurses get to be one on one with their patients and only focus on them and not just their medical needs, but just their whole everything that they need mentally too, as well. And I loved that. So I went into it just hoping for relief and found myself just in this world that, as you read in the book, I just went into with an open heart, and I'm glad it's changed my life.
Well, but how do you get a smudge on my glasses here? But I mean, like, you can't just walk into a hospice nurse. I mean, you've got to know people. So this is my high. As I was reading your book, I was developing this hierarchy in my mind here. There's like, you've got your God or whoever it is way up here, nurses right below them, and then hospice nurses above them. I mean, to do that work, right, in and of itself is incredible. So what made you think that you would want to do this, that you could do this? I mean, was there any hesitancy about, oh my God, hospice, I'm going to be able to deal with people who are dying?
So, to be honest, in the medical world, we're kind of looked down on as not being as serious of a specialty. We're not as intense, so to say, as like ICU or the ER. It's kind of thought of as something that you do more towards the end of your career, usually.
That's interesting.
And it is not really as well respected as I would say that the general public respects us.
Wow, very interesting to learn. Um, did you know that before you walked into it?
Yes, and
Yeah.
I actually was asked by a family member if I was ever going to go back to being a real nurse again. And I was like, yeah, maybe, I'm not sure. It was just thought of as this little little thing that you do just for a little bit.
Wow, that's really interesting to me. I before I went to graduate school for clinical psychology, I was on the track to be a physician. And as part of my volunteer work, I was on the palliative care team at Mass General
Mm.
Hospital in Boston, which was an amazing experience. And um, then I started to have science courses, and I was like, nope. But anyway, I have from that experience, I like garnered so much respect for people who do what you do. Um, so how talk to us about how things unfolded as you started to get into or your experiences with being a hospice care nurse. What was it like for you when you first started?
It was a little bit weird at first. I thought everyone was a little bit crazy. It's very different than any other type of medicine where it's just here's a symptom and here's a treatment. And in hospice, we really accept that people are having almost spiritual things happen to them. And instead of just trying to treat whatever we see, we really meet them where they are. And we just say, okay, well, you're seeing your deceased loved one. And the doctors, too, that I call, they're like, well, are they okay? Are they in any distress? And I'm like, well, no, they're happy. And they're like, great. That's our
Mm-hmm.
job. That's all we
Mm-hmm.
have to do. If they're happy, we're happy. And that was so different. And I really like it. I really wish that some other specialties would really take note of that. Um, but it's it's so whole person, like you do psychiatry. You know that you're doing that as well, and how fulfilling that can be to be on that side of medicine.
It was interesting to me. You know, you have the book kind of situated with the names of the people. The
Mm-hmm.
first one here is what is hold on here. Not Carl is the
Glenn,
second one. Is
yeah,
Glenda?
Glenda's. Mm-hmm.
Glenda, you're right. And at one point, you go in and she's like talking to her sister.
Yeah,
And a lot of people would think, okay, one, she's nuts. She's getting towards the end. She's, but that's not it. What? Talk to us about that.
yeah. I thought that too at first. I was like, okay, they're hallucinating. I see hallucinations. Nothing new. What are we gonna do for it? That's what I said to my manager. Just tell me what medications do we use? And she was like, well, no. She's seeing her deceased sister. She's crossing over, and as long as she's okay, then we're okay, and we're just gonna make sure that she's safe so her daughter can rest. And as I just kept experiencing this more and more, I came to learn that it doesn't matter what your background is or your beliefs, you will see the same thing. Everyone sees their deceased loved ones, which
Wow.
is so interesting to me. And the big difference as well in hospice is that you get to know these patients. So I know whenever my patients are not their baseline, I know them.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever they are just casually talking to me and they're like, yeah, my sister's here, my daughter's here, my mom's here that are all dead, and then they continue talking to me like normal, I know that that is not a medical symptom because
Mm-hmm.
I know them well. And so as I continued in my career, I learned that this is just something that happens.
Now, before you started, did you come to this profession with a certain religious belief system?
So I grew up extremely religious, Episcopalian Christian. And then as I dealt with the struggles that come with being a very young single mom, and then working mostly in the ER in the hospital and seeing just the true horrors of the world, and then speaking to all the nurses in there who said, we don't believe in anything. And I understand that from what they see.
Mm-hmm.
And I had gone into it really not believing in anything. And that was very difficult for me to go from one extreme to another extreme to now what I consider an in between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really struck me as I was reading this is that you and I'm sure your colleagues in the profession as well, you bring with it just this amazing um, appreciation for and almost reverence for humanity
Mm-hmm.
that I'm thinking, wouldn't this be great if we treated each other like this during our lives, you know? You get so close. I mean, not every time I'm sure, but a lot of times in ones I've read so far, you get really close to these people. How can you not? And then it's so sad. How do you juggle that? How do you manage that?
It was very difficult for me at first. I ended up having to see a therapist after an event that I do write about that basically, not to have any spoilers, but where a patient's wife committed suicide after I had left. And that I felt personally like I should have known that that was
Mm-hmm.
going to happen when I didn't. Our chaplain said, "You need to see a therapist or you're going to burn out. And I don't want to see you burn out. I think you're a good hospice nurse. So please go see a therapist. This is a lot to handle." So I did. And they helped me so much to
Mm.
really understand the difference between empathy and sympathy, and that you can grow close to these people and you can appreciate all the happy moments and also take with it that there are going to be sad moments, but that's just kind of life, you know. There can't be rainbows without rain.
That's a simple lesson, but it's not easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not easy to do. I think at one point in the book, you talked about, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you said like, okay, this is a profession where we we don't bring stuff home. It's like 9 to 5, but how can you not bring this stuff
Mm-hmm.
home?
And you know, I still do. um and really that um what I found to be really healthy for me is to accept that you are going to bring some of it home, but also realizing that I cannot be the only person. So I used to, like you read in the beginning of the book, if someone needed me, I would be there. I would be
Mm-hmm.
on call. I would not rest for, months. I would be on call 24/7. And I've had to really learn that I can trust my team. Other people can also care for these patients well, and I cannot pour from an empty cup.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God. All right. So, obviously, without giving away too much, but I want to ask you to share about one of the experiences in the book. Just give us a kind of a thumbnail. I want to give the listener more of an idea of what this book is about.
Yeah, so Carl's one of my favorites, of course. And basically, what happened with Carl is he did not want us in his house. He was older man in his 80s, and he wanted at the end of his life to just lay in his bed and watch sports and not be bothered by all these people taking his blood pressure and looking at him. So he was a little bit grumpy. And the way I had him warm up to me is I would have him teach me things, and I would ask him, what is sports? My boyfriend at the time, now my husband, he loves sports, but I don't get it. Can you explain it to me? And he liked that. He liked having a role. And then as we continued speaking, he learned that I was a single mom and I didn't have time to watch the news or watch sports or do anything. So he made it his little personal mission to keep me updated. And he would have a little report for me each time I showed up. And then that evolved into writing down little notes for me because he said, "Oh, every time you leave,
Mm.
I think of something I wanted to tell you." And right before he died, just a couple of days beforehand, he had what we call a surge of energy. So he was all of a sudden out of bed, which I'd never seen him out of bed. And he was walking around and he was actually playing hide and seek with his deceased daughter. And she had died many years, many, many, many years beforehand. And he said that he was trying to find her and that he would be going with her soon. So that is coupled with the seen deceased loved ones.
Mm.
And I really struggled with that. I didn't know what to do, especially with this man that I had grown so incredibly close to. And I learned to meet them where they were. And I just helped him kind of search for her. We went back into bed. And right before he died, he told me, "Thank you for giving me something to look forward to instead of death."
Oh my
And
God.
that was the moment that I realized that this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Oh my
Something
gosh.
so little as those notes was
Hmm.
making a huge difference.
So kind of break it down for us a little bit. What was going on there with, I mean, obviously you were trying to build a rapport with him,
Mm-hmm.
right? But in turn, it was almost what, giving him
A
a new
purpose.
a purpose
Mm-hmm.
at that time in his life.
And I didn't even realize I was doing that
You didn't.
until later. No, I just was
Oh,
trying to get him to talk to me.
oh my God. But you just seem to have this natural way about doing it. And then with his daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and you hadn't up to that point, you'd like, what daughter?
Yeah, they had never told me about her at all. And of course, people have pictures around their house, and I was like, maybe that's a granddaughter. I had seen her in a picture like alone, and I had always kind of wondered, but they had never shared with me that they had had a daughter that had drowned,
Mm,
and she came to get him.
oh my gosh. How has your perception of death evolved?
I used to really see it as the end, like that was it, and that was very depressing for me to think about, so I would just avoid it. And
Right.
now I see it as people just going almost next door. Like I will join them one day, I will see them again, and I will get sad because it's like it will probably be a long time until I see them again. But there's that hope for me. I feel like I will see them again. So it's not
Mm,
nearly as sad or depressing.
I like that. I want to adopt that and adapt that viewpoint. It's and I think for a lot of us, it's like, whoa, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to deal with this. But again, in your book, again, we're talking with Hadley Vlahos. She's a registered nurse. The book is called The In Between, Unforgettable Encounters During Life's Final Moments. Your book really brings to the fore the beauty of um, connection and relationship that not only between human beings, but I think that this time presents itself with, right? This is an opportunity for these things. And I think a lot of us feel like we don't want to walk into those waters because it's so,
Mm-hmm.
we, I mean, for understandable reasons.
Yeah, a lot of people feel that way. And I've heard through studies that that actually makes it worse whenever you try to avoid it.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that probably pretty much goes for everything in our lives.
Yeah.
Um, I want to go back to this other thing you said about how hospice nurses are not really very well respected to me, which sounds so crazy to me, especially because this is one of the most intense periods of our lives. Is that do you struggle with that, or is that just forget about it? I just move on, just move forward.
I used to whenever I was a newer nurse and I was just very insecure about everything. Now I've been a nurse 8 years and I just feel very secure in myself and my role and the role I play. I don't really care about things like that anymore. But, it used to be my identity when I was just out of nursing school was what type of nurse are you?
Mm-hmm.
What role are you playing? And now I'm very comfortable in the identity that I have about myself, that I care for people and I love them. And I am very happy to wake up and go to work every day.
One of the things you mentioned in the book, and I was in reading the book, there are so many interesting uh, viewpoints you have, and one you talk about. I think you were replacing one nurse who, I think it was in the first chapter, the nurse is going into the room and he says, all right, Mr. So and so, I'm going to turn on the light. And he turns on the light. And after that, you take a mental note and you're like, you know what? I've got to maybe navigate these situations with a little more tact. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did learn those as I went along. And I think it's important to learn, through role models, not only who you want to be like, but also learn what you don't want to do and keep that in mind. And at the time when I'm explaining just these first times, I'm like, oh, the patient really didn't like that. I shouldn't do that. And now that I'm so experienced in my role, I've been a hospice nurse for so many years, I realize that something as simple as them saying, don't turn on the light and turning on the light anyway is taking away more control from someone who has lost so much control of their life due to a disease. And that is so unfair to do to someone. But it might seem so small, but it's really not.
Yeah, it does. So the alternative is what?
Whenever someone has a choice, let them have it, no matter how small it is. And if that is someone saying, don't come at 12, come at 1, I will move my lunch around. I will go out of my way to go see a different patient. Because for some people, just being able to control their environment when their own body is out of control can mean a lot.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, well, first of all, when I think of a nurse, I think of someone who really wants to uh, spend time with their patients. I mean, a lot of times in our culture, we look at doctors as they have a lot of knowledge and they don't really spend that much time with their patients. And then that may be incorrect, but with nurses, I think a lot of us feel like, oh my God, these people are so amazing. They spend so much time and they want to spend so much time with their patients. But with hospice nurses, it's like the way you're describing it, talking about it, you're spending time with them at this just incredible time. I don't know what to say. It's just so amazing the work you're doing.
It is. And what's so special about hospice is that all of these patients have accepted that they're going to die within 6 months. There's many specialties that deal with dying patients, but whenever your goal is curative, their mindset is different. So this is really the only one where you're going to have people say, I've been thinking about my life and this is what I wish I would have done differently, because they've accepted that they're not going to do any sort of treatment. They're not going to go back to the ER or the hospital, and they are aware that they're going to die within 6 months.
Define hospice care for our listeners who maybe don't know.
Yes. If you don't know what hospice care is, it is where nurses, doctors on call, social workers, chaplains, and aides come to wherever you are. So usually that's a home, but that can also be a nursing home, an assisted living, wherever you live. We come to you instead of you having to go to the hospital, to the doctor's office, to the ER. And a doctor has to say that you have 6 months or less to live, and you have to decide to not pursue any curative treatment, such as chemotherapy, surgery, any sort of treatment that would extend your life. So your only goal in life now is to do what you want. And we come to you and we're on call 24/7.
Talk to us about, like, when you first started this, talk to us about maybe some quote unquote mistakes you made or errors you made. And now you look back and like, oh my God, what did you learn from that in a sense?
There is a lot. It was definitely a big learning curve for me. Thankfully, I was very fortunate that an older nurse told me very early on, you will never be in trouble for asking questions. You will be in trouble for assuming and doing anyway. So I was always very good about asking questions when I did not know something. But I had the common misconceptions that I think a lot of people have, that we're just giving you pain meds until you go to sleep, which is not true at all. There's many people who never take a single pain med, not even a Tylenol. And I just had these misconceptions that the nurse, even so, that the nurses were doing so much. And I've come to learn that a lot of it are caregivers. And I have come to learn how much we do not recognize caregivers in the United States and all of the work that they do. I really didn't understand how much unseen work caregivers of hospice patients do in the US.
Now, when you say caregivers, who fall, what people fall under that category?
So usually it's for my patients that live at home. So it would be a living spouse where they're having to give them medications, change their adult diaper, for example, get them up and shower them. I mean, they are taking care of another human 24/7. Sometimes that's an adult child, it could be a grandchild sometimes.
Right. So another just all consuming, emotional, intense, draining, possibly job.
Yes. It's like being a parent, basically, which we have, in my opinion. I'm a parent. There's a lot of emphasis on caring for yourself and self-care and take a break when you can and all of that. And I didn't really understand how hard it is for these caregivers and how much they're just really not seen, in my opinion.
So it's interesting to hear you say that before all this, you wanted to be a writer. So after reading this, I'm like not surprised, because before I knew that, I was like, oh my God, this writing is so incredible. Why did you write the book? What inspired you to do that?
So when I got started on social media, just sharing my stories, social media for me was a very easy way to get these stories that I love to write down and tell out very quickly without having to go through the entire book process. And so I just started telling them, and I was shocked at how many people really liked them because death is so taboo. So I thought maybe people are like, I don't want to watch this. I'm going to keep scrolling. But people loved them. And I was shocked. And I just read all these comments where people are saying, you're giving me peace. This is helping with my fear of death. Thank you so much. My dad died and he saw his dad who was deceased. And I thought that maybe he was just crazy at the end of his life. And I didn't know that other people experienced this. This is giving me so much peace about his death. And I said, okay, well, a 60-second video can really only do so much. There needs to be a book so people can really be put into my shoes and they can understand these stories much more fully.
You talked about patients rather, who were near death and seeing their loved ones. I mean, granted, someone can be hallucinating.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to say hallucinating, because, well, there's that fine line there. How do you differentiate? And does it even matter?
So yeah, that's so interesting. I was talking to someone about this just recently, but the differences between hallucinations and seeing deceased loved ones is that hallucinations can be anything, like truly anything. It can be the wall moving, a spider, and they're usually kind of scary for the person experiencing them. Seeing deceased loved ones is always peaceful, and it's always that deceased loved ones. It doesn't change.
Wow.
But does it really matter? This is what I think, especially whenever it comes to the debate about spirituality versus the brain playing tricks on us. The way I feel is that even if it's just our brains that do this, they release some chemical we haven't discovered yet at the end of life. Knowing that we are going to be comforted and greeted and happy at the end of life, I still think that needs to be known. Even by people who don't have spiritual beliefs, I think that can bring peace for people to know that we will not be scared whenever that happens.
Yeah, I completely agree. As we kind of wind down here, what do you say to people who are like listening to this and like, oh my God, I love Hadley. I want to do this, but I'm too scared. What would you say to them?
To do hospice? I would say that you should try it. And if you don't like it, you can always try something different. But just go into it with an open mind, open heart, and just try it out.
What does it require? And my guess is there's something that differentiates you from the nurses who maybe don't even want to touch this, don't want to do this, maybe even look down, as you said, upon it.
Mm-hmm. I would say really wanting to get to know your patients and really wanting to do more than just tasks, like medical tasks, because there's many nurses who are great about that. They're very technical and can really do very high level stuff that I can't do. And wanting to really sit down with someone and really get to know them and communicate with them, you really do need to have that skill. And then also at the same time, you have to really know where that line is and really have a good social sense when you need to step in and help with a situation, especially with difficult family situations that always come up. You really need to know where the line is, where you need to step in and where you need to say, this is not my business and I need to step out.
Give us an example.
So just recently, I had a patient who was just extremely unhappy, just so mad at me all the time. I couldn't do anything right. I gave the wrong medication. I know I didn't, but just anything I did was incorrect. And I finally said to her, what would a good experience look like for you on hospice? Explain to me what a good experience would look like. And she said, a good experience to me would be my kids to stop fighting. And I was like, oh, okay, this has nothing to do with me. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, what are they fighting about? So they're fighting about me. They're fighting about moving me across state to another daughter's or staying here. And they think I can't hear them in the living room and I can hear them. And so at that point, I said, okay. So I walked out and I said, I'm going to talk to them if that's okay with you. And she said, yes, please do. And so walked out, called the other one on speaker so that everyone's equal and said, hey, this is what's going on. Y'all need to know this. They said, oh, we didn't know that she knew. And I said, she knows. And they said, okay. I said, and it's really bothering her. And so that was a moment where I had to really step in and take control. Mm-hmm. But there are other instances where, for example, a child is given power of attorney, which is where they get to make all the decisions. And it's not always the child that takes care of the loved one. And the loved one who is the one who is doing all of the work says, I don't understand. I just do all this work. And then someone who lives in another state gets to make all these decisions. Oh, that's a situation where you can't do anything. Right. You can't do anything except listen and provide active listening and say, I understand that's so frustrating, but nothing really needs to be done. And you just really need to understand when those situations are where you need to step in or not, because if you do it incorrectly, it can really blow things up the wrong way.
And my guess is that's where experience comes in.
It is definitely experience and leaning on people who do have experience whenever you don't. There would have been nothing wrong with, if I didn't know recently with that, the kids fighting, me stepping out and calling an older hospice nurse and saying, hey, what would you do?
Mm-hmm. Well, Hadley, so awesome talking to you, man. Congratulations on the book. It's amazing. I can't wait to get this out there. Love to have you back on the podcast at a later date. Just awesome. And I have so much appreciation and reverence for the work you're doing. You're incredible.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We'll be in touch.